So the title of our panel is What Employees Actually Want.
What I hear often is people want to be safe, seen, and included.
And I think it's really common for organizations to do a survey, ask people, what do you want? Why are you unhappy? What do you like? What do you not like? And then to do essentially nothing with those results. And that's a very common thing that I hear when I work with my clients or when I work with organizations. And that just destroys trust.
I think what I've seen from our employees, we have a myriad of both professional and individuals that work in our clinic. So something a little bit different than just a corporate environment. We've got folks that are working hourly jobs. And I think what they need to see from us is leadership being present and understanding what they do on a day-to-day basis and showing up and having commitment to listen to them.
One of the things that I think I've learned through my HR career, when you become a manager, I think sometimes you forget and you have this story. Here's what I need to do as a manager. And we spend a lot of time talking with our managers about, hey, this is using two parts of your brain as you're doing it, and it's okay that it's hard. And I think if you can create that sense of vulnerability and that, if you can do that, it creates a little bit more confidence in people. And if you give them it's okay to ask a question, it's okay to be not great at this, we found that it really helps maintain manager engagement.
We're kind of kicking off in this place in the work world right now where managers are facing a crisis. And that crisis looks something like this. 75% of them are experiencing burnout. 41% of their time is actually spent on managing people, only 41% of the time. 27% of our managers today are actively working on their exit strategy, and fewer employees want to be promoted to managers. Self-confidence has been identified as both their number one challenge and their number one goal in the workplace. And organizations lose $15.4 billion annually on manager turnover. So with those really exciting and happy numbers, I'm going to kick it to our panel to help us kind of tease out this manager crisis that we're talking about and give us a lot of different perspective on it from their lived experience and their subject matter expertise. So the title of our panel is What Employees Actually Want. Based on your own expertise and perspective, what is it employees want when it comes to workplace culture? And what's one step companies can take to get there? So anyone want to kick that off? And then we'll just kind of go around, have everyone answer.
I'll go first, I guess. I'm not an HR person, so keep that in mind, but I do work with organizations and executives in the work that I do. I think what people want, this is going to sound very unsexy, but if leadership asks you a question, they want you to commit to solving whatever the answer is. And I think it's really common for organizations to do a survey. Ask people, what do you want? Why are you unhappy? What do you like? What do you not like? And then to do essentially nothing with those results. And that's a very common thing that I hear when I work with my clients or when I work with organizations. And that just destroys trust. If you're going to ask the question, you need to be willing to do something with the answer that you get. And it can't be trite. You can't pat people on the head. And if they say like, hey, we're looking for better balance, we're burning out, there's bad things happening here, you can't just buy a ping pong table. You can't just get an Xbox. These are the things that kind of cater to people of a certain age without a lot of responsibilities. And the burnout is coming from not that entry-level part of the workforce, but from the levels above that have been working really hard to get what they need done. You just can't be trite about it. And if you're going to ask, you need to do something with the answer. And if you don't, then you should expect burnout and people to exit.
I am an HR person, so my name's Liz Thiel, and I am with Netsmart Technologies, and we're a healthcare technology company based here in the United States. And we are actually in the middle of our engagement pulse right now. And we set out 3 years ago and said to our associates, we want to earn an engagement score of 80, which is kind of your top 10% from an engagement perspective. And to Maki's point, every survey twice a year, we say, this is what you told us, here's what we're doing. This is what you told us, here's what you're doing. And we knew we were making a difference when people started doing it organically. And I think that was the point. They wanted to know that we were authentic in asking the question, and we were also committed to making those changes. And it's not HR driving it, it's leaders, it's managers, it's that frontline team that's helping to live it out. And I think that's what associates want, is honesty and integrity as you're going through that. And we're at 80 right now on the survey, and it closes in 2 weeks, and I'm very anxious.
Roosevelt Lyons, I'm the owner of Lyons Share, where we provide leadership coaching, facilitation, and training. And I think what I hear often is people want to be safe, seen, and included. So safe being I want to be in a space where I can be myself, where I can be vulnerable. That just means I'm free to admit when I don't know something, when I've made a mistake, to push back sometimes. Seen being I want people to see me as an individual, not just as a kind of a worker that's here to contribute, right? So see me as my whole self. And then included, oftentimes, especially as this younger generation's entering the workforce, they want to be included in the organization. They're being asked to give up their time. They're being asked to give results, but they're not always being included in the decision making, right? So safe, seen, and included is what I think of when I think of like what are people looking for in the workplace right now?
I'll go last. I'm Audrey. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Vibrant Health. I also have the responsibility of HR, which has been a new adventure for me. So I think what I've seen from our employees, we have a myriad of both professional and individuals that work in our clinic. So something a little bit different than just a corporate environment. We've got folks that are working hourly jobs. And I think what they need to see from us, or that they've indicated they want to see from us, is leadership being present and understanding what they do on a day-to-day basis, and showing up and having commitment to listen to them, I think has been the most important thing.
Thank you for those answers. And as you're all talking, there was a through line of listening, measuring, and having this sense of belonging. But I want to go back to Roosevelt, what you said about being seen, being heard, being valued in the workplace. How can companies actually measure, and what does that look like when we know our employees are actually feeling seen and heard and valued?
Yeah, so I think of a company that I worked with, a nonprofit, and they actually approached me with a very unique problem. And it was that they had, because they had such low turnover, there weren't a lot of positions for people to move up into to be promoted, right? So that low turnover was a really good indication of people wanted to be there, right? And then they made the step of not waiting until people get promoted into these supervisory leadership positions, but investing in leadership development at a very early age, at every stage, no matter where they were in that organization, right? And so that investment in like how much you are actually investing, whether that's time, whether that's actually money, in everybody's development is another really good indicator, right? And then also like just the feels, and this was an organization that worked with a very hard population, very vulnerable population, very, very heavy work. But when you walked into that space, like you wouldn't know it because like the way that people interacted with you, like it just made you feel good and you wouldn't know that they were carrying this heavy load, right? And so those are some of the like things that you can't necessarily measure, right? But you could feel them when you walk in the door, right? And that translates to good reputation, which translates to return business, and a growing customer base, right? So those are some of the ways you can measure like whether you're actually doing it.
I'm happy to share. So we partnered 5 years ago now with a company called Modern Health, and we replaced our traditional EAP. We replaced our wellness solutions with Modern Health. And what they offer is both coaching services, so internationally certified coaches across financial, physical, professional, emotional areas, as well as then traditional therapy. And the way we've measured success, can you still hear me if it's down here? The way that we've measured success with that is both the number of associates that we have that have engaged with the program, but our biggest metric today is how many of their dependents have engaged with it. And because it's not an ERISA governed plan, we're able to create the rules. And what we say is it's anyone you care about. if that's your neighbor, it's your husband's coworker, it's anyone in your community that you want to live out reducing the stigma around mental health and increasing access, Netsmart is paying for this piece of it. And we have seen year after year that dependent utilization rise. And at the same time, we've seen the response on our engagement pulse of Netsmart cares about our associates' well-being go up significantly. And it's correlated with people recognizing that it's not just your mental health, it's all the people that are around you. So we use that as a huge metric.
So I want to switch a little bit to the manager crisis that I mentioned at the beginning. 70% of employee engagement is determined by the manager. And Audrey, this is a question I want to start with you. How have you seen this play out in the workplace, of that correlation between manager happiness, manager engagement, and employee engagement, both in the workplace and in the financial statement? How does that impact there as well?
Oh, wow. That's, I'm living that right now. So our individuals that work in our health center carry, they have a little bit of compassion fatigue just because of what they do. And we have some clinical managers. I can think of something very specifically. One of our nurse managers has a pretty heavy, she is burned out herself because she's not only a care provider, she's also managing a very large team. So you compound, it's a very compounded issue. And what that has led to us on her team is a high degree of employee churn, retention, inability to manage the staff to where they are fighting amongst themselves. And so we've been dealing with, how do you wrangle that? Like, what do you do there? So for me, sitting on the HR side, I'm like, I cannot believe we're having to try to get in between this issue. Like, we should not be having this issue. This is a manager level issue that should not come to HR, but here we are. And then on the finance side, every time I lose a medical assistant or a nurse, it interrupts the continuum of care. We have to retrain them. There's a cost to recruiting, reintroducing the employee to the patients, and just that overall linkage between the provider and the MA gets broken. So that plays out in our ability to retain our patients, all the way to, trying to recruit new medical assistants and sometimes new providers. We've had providers not want to be there if we lose certain medical assistants. So it permeates on both sides, both financially and on the HR side, with just trying to teach people to manage.
Maki, a lot of your work is focused on high achievers. How do you see this issue playing out with high achieving managers or employees who are maybe striving to be managers one day and they see their managers burning out or they see their managers disengaging?
Yeah, I was so excited to answer earlier. I didn't introduce myself. So the work that I do is typically strategic advising with executives and executive coaching. So a lot of the times I'm working with someone who's gone into an organization from a high-level leadership position, but I'm not embedded in the organization. So I'm working, behind the scenes with them. And I would say that this is not exactly what you're asking, but I think it's an important point to make, that when you bring in, two things. First of all, are you willing to bring in leadership from outside of the organization? I think it is a huge red flag when organizations do not do that and they try to grow everyone from within because you have a bunch of Kool-Aid drinkers, whether that's your intention or not, and you are propagating a leadership model that has existed, and it may not be healthy. It may not be the best. And sometimes what you end up with in those situations around the burnout is you've got people who are maybe really good at engineering, and so they're being elevated into a leadership position, but they're not good managers necessarily, or they don't have leadership capabilities necessarily. So that's a problem and a challenge, and I think one that organizations are not super willing to look at a lot of the time, to say, like, hey, are we inadvertently and sometimes advertently on purpose creating a culture where we have these expectations and a mold of what leadership looks like, and people are good at backslapping, and so they elevate, but not necessarily good at execution. And then the other piece of that is, if you bring someone in to be a change agent, don't suck that life out of them when they try to do the thing that you brought them in to do. I cannot tell you how often I see this, where I'm working with an executive who's going in at the C-suite level and they're like, your expertise and knowledge is why we need you here because we're not growing and we're not doing all these things. But when that person tries to do that in their role, it's, oh, we really can't, we got to do it the way we've always done it, or that's not going to work here, or there's just a return to whatever the archetype of that business or industry is. And it really doesn't matter what the industry is, because every single industry has that same tendency to do those things. And then what happens is if you're not careful and if you don't have someone who is working with someone on the outside who's pushing them to say, no, that's not what you came here for. You came here to be the change and they're not letting you. And that's the thing you need to remind them of and advocate for, because you don't need to stay if they're not going to let you. Most people end up getting sucked into that system. And the reason they were brought in just goes out the window and they just assimilate to whatever the challenges in that culture are. And I think that is how you create burnout, because people that at the lower levels that want the change. I remember one of the worst things that was ever said to me, and we have a shared history up here at a company that I worked at, was, don't worry, this isn't going to affect you. And I'd be like, well, shit, I want it to affect me. Like, this is terrible. We need something to change. And they think that people are averse to that when really they're not. I think most people are craving change when they see that something is wrong. And most organizations aren't willing to do those things because they're hard and disruptive and et cetera, et cetera.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Chime in there real quick. So that 70% number is research from Gallup, which just does tons of really good research. Their book, Wellbeing at Work, is awesome. And they use the number in there. It's like 15 to 20% of total wages go to involuntary departures. So, but it's also really important to recognize that impact of a poor manager doesn't just stop at work. It permeates your personal life. In that book, Wellbeing, they talk about the kind of 5 areas of well-being, and that work or your career well-being is the foundation for your overall well-being. So when you're not happy at work, then it makes it very hard to be happy in life. And I'm sure everybody has a story, knows somebody, or has experienced a poor manager and that coming home to you, whether that's your partner, whether that's you, and you know that just sucks the life out of you and makes it hard to live a full life when that manager is really kind of weighing on you all the time. So it doesn't just stop at work. It actually impacts you, outside of work. But then, of course, that comes back to work, and we have decreased productivity as well. So
that's a great call out. And one question that I have kind of in follow-up to that for everyone to answer is, how can companies educate or cultivate managers that don't do that actually support and also still uphold accountability in the workplace? So kind of the both and of being there from a personal, interpersonal level, while also, hey, we still have accountability standards.
I'll just start by saying, like, your point, it's not an either or. And if we want accountability, we have to start with a foundation of trust and good working relationships. Once we have that, and there's a Patrick Lencioni in his book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, talks about trust being the foundation of any kind of high-performing team. So it's not like whether we can have accountability or whether we can have good relationships. In order to have accountability, we have to have good relationships. So that starts with treating people like people. I always talk about sometimes managers, I call it like manager amnesia, where we forget all the things that we wanted when we were the follower. And then when we get into this management position, we start to do all the things that we hated, right? And I like to think nobody wakes up in the morning, they're like, you know what, today I want to micromanage the shit out of people today, right? But they do it, right? Because of the pressure and all those things, because it's a shortcut, right? So just changing that mindset to realize, like, if I want my team to be productive, I actually have to invest and take time. That 40% number of like people manage or people managing has to be a lot higher, and realizing that has to be the main focus.
Have to encourage people not to be so passive. Part of the conditioning that we receive as a society is very, if somebody asks you to do something, you say yes. You want to be a team player. You want the opportunities. You really shouldn't have boundaries at the beginning of your career, because that's how you're going to move up and people are going to see your value. And we kind of breed passivity into the workforce inadvertently, and we put a lot of pressure on management and leadership to be the person who's out there teasing it out, where we really need to teach people, if something's not okay with you, you need to speak up. right? No one can read your mind. And if it's really not working for you, you need something else from the leadership. You need to ask for what you need. Like, you cannot just sit there and be like a victim of the circumstances and the situation. But unfortunately, and, you know, as Katie alluded to, my specialty is type A personalities. You know, as successful as they are super conditioned to operate within specific parameters that they think mean they will be successful. What they're not looking at is, at what cost am I creating that success, and what is the toll that it's going to take, because it's going to ruin the rest of my life. But you've got to, and as a manager, I think one of the best things you can do as a leader is to look at someone who doesn't really ever speak up and be like, I want to know what's actually going on with you, and we're not going to leave this room until you actually tell me what that is. And give them the permission, and then again, take that information and do something with it. But we've got to teach people that they're not victims.
I was going to say something, but now I'm just thinking about what Maki said. One of the things that I think I've learned through my HR career is that, and it resonates with something that you said, Roosevelt, when you become a manager, I think sometimes you forget and you have this story of, here's what I need to do as a manager. And we spend a lot of time talking with our managers about, hey, this is hard. This is really challenging. This is using two parts of your brain as you're doing it. And it's okay that it's hard. It's normal that it's hard. And I think if you can create that sense of vulnerability, and that it's not that you're not doing a good job, it's that your job is really hard. If you can do that, it creates a little bit more confidence in people. And it also, to Maki's point, people are able then to say, this is the piece I'm struggling with now. I don't want to micromanage, but I'm not sure actually how to get it done another way. And if you give them it's okay to ask a question, it's okay to be not great at this, we found that it really helps maintain manager engagement as well as manager retention.
Let's comment on that. So to that point, like that idea of raising self-awareness. So a lot of the poor managers I see are people that have a low sense of self-awareness, right? So they are easily triggered. They don't know why they're triggered, and they're walking around triggering everybody else. They don't know their motivations. They don't know their strengths. And so first step for any manager is doing the work for yourself. If you want to lead other people, if you want to build strong relationships, you have to do a little introspection, and whatever that looks like, whether it's coaching, whatever it is. If you haven't done that, then please don't expect to jump into this work, because it is not easy and it's not automatic.
And finding a culture that supports you doing that work for yourself. Because if you're operating in a culture that says, nope, don't look inward, just keep looking at the bottom line, look at the number, don't worry about all that other stuff, you'll burn out. We'll see some of the impacts that we're talking about up here. So what does it look like when companies get it right? How have you seen that play out? Do you have any examples from your own lived experiences? Simon's is... Yeah. I was trying to be optimistic. That's worked. Oh my goodness. Well, I definitely know what it feels like when it's wrong. But when I think when it's right, it's, what did the kids say? You feel the vibes. It's very much permeates through every level. Like, you can walk through the hallways of, the clinic, or you can walk through the hallways and everyone is, what can I do? How can I help you? It's just this level of engagement from the employees that if it's not there, they're isolated. They operate in their own silo. They become exceptionally defensive. They don't want to cross-collaborate. It feels very adversarial. And I've lived in both circumstances. But from where it's been really great for me, and this was many years ago, was the leadership started from the top down. It was definitely the leadership shadow of the person that was leading the organization, creating a safe space for people to have a voice and be heard and collaborate. And that is what I think makes all the difference.
I'll also say, so obviously, besides all the metrics like the lower turnover rate, the lower absenteeism rate, the higher safety, fewer safety incidents, all those kind of things, but also people are more likely to give their discretionary effort, right? They're more likely to go above and beyond and not just give the minimum, right? So when you look around and people are just doing just enough to get by, that's a really good indication that there is a lack of psychological safety. People don't feel safe. They're keeping their head down and they're just managing, right? But when people feel safe, another great book by Tim Clark, it's 4 stages of psychological safety. When people feel safe, they're much more likely to go above and beyond, to step out of their lane and really think big picture about the organization and what's best for the organization, and not just about what's best for me. So you see those people raising their hand, they're more engaged, they're asking about what's going on over here, all those kind of things.
So a lot of people focus on HR as being the end-all be-all, the place where all of this happens. It starts and stops with HR. And a couple months ago, there was this Coldplay concert. I don't know if you all paid any attention to that. I watched the comments about HR come out all over those posts on LinkedIn, and I was fascinated by what people had to say about HR. That they didn't trust HR in their own company. Of course, it was the HR head. Of course, it was her.
It was the HR lady, actually.
The HR lady. Who else would it have been? And it got me thinking, what is the role of HR in psychological safety, in creating a workforce that is highly engaged? And what isn't the role of HR? Where does it start and where does it stop?
So many thoughts on this one, right? HR, like finance, right? There are so many functions in the business where we're keeping the organization compliant, but at the same time, we're executing against what the business strategy is. And I think you can maintain your credibility as an HR leader, as a person, a manager, a leader in the organization, if you're constantly connecting back to that business outcome. I think where you lose credibility, where you get some of those stereotypes is, I'm telling you to do it because these are the rules and this is what we have to do, or I am holding people to a different standard. And I think that's probably where HR organizations can be really credible, is if you have earned a seat at the table, you're actively engaged in it. And then the other side is you're calling some of the BS that's happening that's not who we want to be.
With some heads of HR, and I would say that as a non-HR person, what I hear is they don't get to do the role that they're qualified to do as the human resources professionals. Like, they get very focused on benefits and hiring and retention and, personal development plans and all that kind of stuff. And what they're capable of doing isn't really supported by the organization or the leadership maybe as much as they'd want it to be. So they feel like there's less human and more box checking than they would prefer.
Oh, man. Keeping compliant for sure. I would say I think a lot of times we have a pretty wide range of employee ages, which has been a big challenge, I think, for us, because the boomers all the way down to Gen Z now show up very differently at work and have different expectations for what HR is supposed to do. So the biggest challenge for me has been, okay, we're not party planners. We're trying to keep everybody compliant, abide by the same rules, but we end up playing this. It's like we're almost a parent to some of the younger generation. They're like, oh, Betsy looked at me the wrong way. I didn't get invited to lunch. And they come to, what am I supposed to do with that, right? Like, I can't, and this is where the manager role, like training the managers to helping to mitigate that, because that's not an HR issue, but just this flood of the younger generation is not, I think I used the word resilient in knowing like what warrants an HR complaint versus what needs to be talked through with their manager. And then their manager, since we're not a huge organization, may or may not have the full toolkit to be able to deal with some of that. So it's like us trying to walk this tightrope of, I hear you, but that you need to go back to your manager on that. And that had not been, I stepped into this role, 7 months ago, and that had not been a delineated line. So trying to get that worked out has been interesting.
And I agree with everything that's been said. And I'll also say, one of the things, I get calls from HR leaders who are very frustrated and at the end of their rope, because oftentimes leadership is essentially handing them this pile of S and saying, like, fix it for me. So they're saying, oh, culture is bad. We want you to fix it. We don't want to have to do anything as leadership. You figure that out and let us know when it's done, right? So there's no skin in the game oftentimes from leadership, whether that's the executive director or the executive team, right? Or any need to change what they're doing. This is their problem. HR, you go and fix it, right? And they don't have the authority, nor do they have the necessary support, especially if it is the executive team that has caused a lot of these problems, right? If they're conflict avoidant and all these things, right? So I get those calls often of they're just at the end of their rope and they're very frustrated. And they're looking for somebody to help support them and help them think that they're not crazy, right? Because they're being asked to do something that's almost impossible, to change a system without any support. And oftentimes they're the one HR person in the organization, right? With no budget also. So yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like a pattern of being overworked, being told both you're doing compliance and you're moving strategy forward and you're being mom and you're party planner and your event coordinator and you're all these things and on a very low budget. And we also want you to take care of the mental health of everyone in the workplace, but no one's taking care of theirs either. So what's some advice that you would give to organizations or individuals that kind of would be outside the box when it comes to thinking about either their own mental health in the workplace, or if they're managers, how do they help others in their mental health?
I think self-awareness is everything. Roosevelt said that. I mean, my personal journey is that when I found myself in a state of high burnout, I left that to do what I'm doing now. And that was about 8 years ago. And it was very cathartic for me because I wrote a book on that entire experience and the things that I think people aren't encouraged to do as ambitious, high achieving individuals, because everything becomes about the outcome. It becomes about the goal orientation. It becomes about getting more money, getting the promotion, being seen as successful, having the status. And if you have, and I'm not saying that everyone in the workforce is like that, but I think if you are built that way, the way that our systems work based on everything that we've said really can double down on the worst part of that experience. And we don't have time to stop and think about it. So my favorite question to pose that I'll leave everybody with is ask yourself frequently, what am I tolerating? Be willing to look at the answer and don't do it just through the lens of your relationships and other people. It's also about what's happening inside your head. It's about the things you're not tuned into. It's the autopilot. It's the voice. It's the things that repeat, the patterns that you find yourself in. Those are all there for you to discover if you'll just pause and go, wow, this doesn't feel good at all. I have felt terrible for a really long time. I think I'm burned out. What am I tolerating that has created this personal space for me? Because no one else can fix it. It is not realistic to expect your organization, your leader, your manager, or anyone else to fix that for you. You have to be able to articulate it and then tell someone specifically what you need from them. Be willing to stand in your conviction that if you don't get it, it's a non-starter for you, and be willing to walk away if that's what you need to do. But to know that you always have a choice, but the choices have to come from a place of consciousness. And again, we're just not encouraged to do that. It's go, 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 windshield effect, fires to put out, check the boxes because you get your dopamine hit. And none of that is really conducive to having a holistically positive experience in your life. And you aren't just here to be a producer and a material superstar, right? And we need to stop acting like that's the thing that matters. And it's really hard to do that when you're on LinkedIn and it's the highlight reel and it's, all the social media and you can do this and you should 10x your goals. Every time I see something like that, I want to put my head through a wall. I'm like, you do not need to 10x your goals, God. So anyway, I'll just leave you with that. What am I tolerating? And think about that and then do something with the information.
Mine is maybe a little bit similar to yours in that it's who are you tolerating and who are you surrounding yourself with? And I've found that when I've been at my healthiest, it's because I'm surrounded by people who I can be authentic with. And I can say, this piece of the job is really, really hard right now. And it's not someone that's going to like go down in the pit with me, right? It's someone that has that accountability. And I look at people in our organization, managers in particular, that have figured out who is that support system that I have here at work that's healthy. And if you can invest in that, if you don't tolerate, belly aching over the lunch table, but it's that constructive, I think that's where the most support comes from and the most healthy growth comes from.
I think, so we have to make a shift from this idea that like burnout is this individual kind of failure to a system failure, right? So we would like to like push it down to the individual. Maybe you should go do some meditation. Maybe you should go do some yoga, go for a walk. But if people are feeling burnout, especially a lot of people in the organization, that's a systemic failure. And systemic failures require everybody to kind of pitch in and think about how do we change the system, right? And so it starts with just creating an environment where we have strong boundaries. I have been surprised by how many of my coaching clients come to me with complaints about their boss who has very little boundaries. I actually worked with a supervisor who would purposely set their emails up so that they would send at 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, right? So they're setting up people to like have this kind of grind culture mentality. I'm working late, even though they weren't, like they had already gone to bed. The emails are just shooting off at 10 o'clock, right? So we're setting up this like grind culture that is unsustainable already, right? So we have to be very mindful of these systemic failures, and putting in a meditation room into your, office isn't going to solve the problem if people can't take their time off, right? If we continue to promote grind culture, if we only recognize people when they go like above and beyond, we need to start recognizing when people are actually taking care of their health and well-being and not just like, you've worked 80 hours this week, so great job, right? So it really requires us to really rethink the culture and the system and everything in order for people to be healthy and really lean into work.
I think, again, going back to clinical staff, because a lot of this comes from the lens of white collar and type of mental health and all a lot of our clinical staff deal with insecurities that I think a lot of us probably have privilege around that we don't have to deal with. So when it comes to mental health for someone that's a $21, $22 an hour medical assistant that may not have transportation, that may not have able to make rent, that sort of thing, we're dealing with a little bit beyond the meditation room and the walks and these sorts of things. So for my organization, that's hard for us. We're trying to raise money to even support our employees so they can make rent, so we provide transportation so they can get to work. So some of those securities are there for them so they can even think about doing their job. So it's way deeper than, oh gosh, I need to take a walk, or my boss is micromanaging me. It's like, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to make my rent this month? So that's the type of mental health security I think that we're dealing with. And then having, if you have employees that are in that fight or flight, that feeds back up to the manager level even, because you're dealing with someone not showing up. Now I've got to backfill them. What do I do? So there's this kind of like a system of chaos to a certain degree that, we have to be prepared to address. So it's being able to deal with that through the whole experience of the employee, along with giving them tools to be able to deal with that and still have expectations of performance. You still have to have people show up to work. So how are we going to do that? And then just dealing with, more of the administrative office and their mental health. What does Brene Brown say? She says, clear is kind. So if you are just very pointed with, I have no inhibitions when it comes to telling my CEO that is dumb. Or we're not going to do that, or this is what I think. And that's probably because I'm old and I don't care at this point. But there's a little bit of like, and I want my team to do the same for me. I'm like so creating that safe space, the psychological safety for them to be able to do that, I think vastly improves mental health.
Great. So as we wrap up this panel and transition into the next part of the evening, I'm going to ask you all the same question as we close out. So what and what now?
Well, I'll jump in there, I guess. I think what now is just this idea that we have to transition from this idea of kind of, I don't like the term work-life balance because it makes it seem like these things are completely separate, right? And our mindset should be that work is this very important, very influential part of our life. And if we want work, if we want our lives to be, if we want to have well-being in our lives, work has to be working well for us, right? And that goes back, if we want people to work well and be productive, they have to have healthy, productive lives as well, right? So this idea that it's somehow separate from your life and like you hang up, your code and you're done with work for the day, that's just not the way it is. And it probably was at some point way back in the day, maybe, but it just isn't. It just isn't the way it is now. So just making that shift from this isn't a nice to do fluffy thing when we talk about employee well-being. If we want our organization to actually thrive and be productive, this is something we have to invest in.
I think I'll address at the individual level, it can be overwhelming when you look at the big picture of feels like it's not going the way you want it to go, to know what to do first or how to approach change. And the best thing you can really do is to just do the next obvious thing and pull back from the need to know what's going to happen 6 months from now if I take this move. You have no idea, right? Uncertainty is something that we need to build resilience around. You don't really know what's going to happen if you decide to make a change. And you don't need to know the universe of all the things that you need to do to make that change. But if there's something obvious in front of you in that moment, just do that one thing and let the next thing make itself obvious and keep following those signs and signals instead of overwhelming yourself with, I have to have this big picture plan and I have to have it all figured out and I can't make one move until the whole thing is kind of laid out in front of me, which is, again, a piece of the conditioning around, what it takes to be successful at something. And really, in this case, you'll be much more successful if you just go, this next thing feels super obvious to me. This thing is bothering me. I need to have a conversation with this person. Do it. Just the next thing.
Mine is probably coming from something you said, Maki, of what are you tolerating? I think thinking about that as an HR organization serving our business, what are we tolerating that's not supporting healthy business operations? What am I doing individually as a manager, as a leader? That's probably my biggest takeaway.
I think for us, we just had an event last night for our organization, and I thought it was pretty appropriate. What do you stand for? So as an organization, what do we stand for? And if this is what we're putting on the wall, this is what we stand for, it goes all the way down to every associate. And I think living through that mission and vision and making that clear to the associates, that gives them clarity on what we're trying to do. I do think from what's next from my chair, and for our organization is building resilience in our workforce. This next generation that's coming up, they need all the mentoring that they can get. They need to be taught how to, and I don't think they expect to be in the grind culture. I mean, and honestly, I don't think they're built for it right now. So I think they take a different level of management. So as I, go down the hill of my career, it's like, okay, now what do I do for them and their careers they come up? I think it's a completely different orientation as we address that.
Well, thank you to the panelists. We want to give them a round of applause. Anything to add that?